Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Infosecurity Magazine webinar. ISOIEC 27002 is being updated. Are you ready? Let's consider the future of GRC. My name's Eleanor Dalloway. I'm the editorial director of Infosecurity Magazine, and I'm looking forward to diving into this topic with the help of my fantastic panel today. Before I introduce you to the said panel, a few housekeeping points that I need to run through with you. We will have some polls throughout the hour, so please do join in with those as and when they appear. We love to get your feedback. Also use the questions option tab at any point throughout the webinar. If your question is for a specific presenter, just flag that and I will make sure I direct it to the appropriate person. For those of you on Twitter, if you'd like to tweet about the webinar today, our hashtag is InfosecWebinar, so do join the discussion on social media. This webcast qualifies members of ISOIEC, EC Council and ISACA for 1 CPE credit based on a minimum attendance time of 50 minutes. In order to claim your credit, you'll need to log into your Infosecurity Magazine member account 48 hours after the webcast and download your CPE certificate, which will have been generated. You're then responsible for submitting this to the accreditation body yourself. Please note that it will take 48 hours. So all of that aside, let me introduce you to our speakers today. And if you could just give me a little bit of a wave as I introduce you so the audience know who's who, please. So firstly, we have Paul Watts, distinguished analyst at the ISF and former CISO of Kantar. Hi, Paul.
Hi, lovely to be here.
Yeah, lovely to have you. Thank you. Next up, we've got the name that's been giving me nightmares, but I'm going to try and pronounce this right. Agustin Lerma Ganguti, who is the Senior Information Security Lead Auditor at LRQA. Hi, Agustin.
Hi, everybody.
And then we've got Nick Prescott, who is the Senior GRC Consultant at Netitude. Thanks for being here, Nick.
Hi there. How are you doing, everyone?
Thank you. So, thank you so much to LRQA for its sponsorship of today's session, making it all possible, and of course, the whole panel for joining. So Nick is going to kick us off today, presenting an introduction to the topic, and he'll hand over to Agustin, and then we're going to dive into a roundtable discussion. Again, if you want to ask your own questions for that roundtable discussion, please do use the Ask a Question tab. Before I do that, I'm going to push out the first audience poll question today, which is, what is your biggest GRC-related concern? And the options we've given you are cyber resilience, meeting risk appetite and tolerance, supply chain concerns, instant management / ability to restore from backups, which is great because it's World Backup Day. So, and lastly, legal and regulatory compliance. Now, we were limited with the amount of answers we could put into this poll. But if you do have any of your own that aren't on this list, please use the Ask a Question tab and send them in so we know what you think. Okay, perfect. That's enough from me. I'm going to hand over to Nick.
Thank you very much and welcome everyone to this webinar. I'm going to talk for the next 10 minutes about considering the future of GRC and hopefully enjoy the presentation. So what I'm going to do today is just talk a bit about some scene setting and some current and emerging threats. What are the objectives for GRC and how do we approach them? The current and emerging threats that we face today. Now, I think when this webinar was first kind of called and I kind of got involved, it was kind of pre-Ukrainian kind of conflict, where I think as time has gone along, it's been very clear that the Ukrainian conflict or the Russia-Ukrainian war, whatever you want to call it, has certainly kind of changed the threat dynamic picture here. So one of the things I think is always there is that, you know, it is certainly the elephant in the room in here. And I think, you know, we are in you know, when you take the bigger picture, we are in the stage where, you know, whenever you've had a societal or industrial improvement, there's always been an element of kind of counter warfare to deal with it. And I think, but if you look at the agricultural age, agricultural warfare, which was kind of speared swords and shields, and the industrial age had industrial warfare. So you had kind of people with cannon and bayonets, and then the nuclear age, We don't want to talk about nuclear weapons, obviously, but very much we're in a cyber age, so everything on cyber warfare. And I think it's been very interesting in terms of how so much of our business life, our commercial life, our social life is based on information as well as kind of disinformation as well. I'm sure when you listen to the radio, there kind of lots of adverts about making sure that you see the right amount of information, the political impact of certain narratives being going off course. But I think essentially what it it has brought the ability to spread information and disinformation and use the internet in a kind of aggressive manner from the comfort of your own home. We've seen power stations go offline. We've seen e-commerce websites go offline. You see a whole range of cyber warfare things that can kind of pretty much cripple uh, kind of critical national infrastructure. Um, even on the battlefields, a lot of tanks these days. I think Elon Musk has got his Starlink internet connection, and you've got network drones with satellite connections. So there's a whole list of current and emerging threats that businesses up until 10-15 years ago never had to deal with. It doesn't matter if you're a big company or a small company. If you are a company with an infrastructure connected to the internet, you're just as likely to be as we kind of call it, popped as anyone else. And I think it's a really important thing in terms of the threat picture. And it's also very interesting in terms to understand is that many boards that we deal with say that cyber is a really big risk. That's because that everyone who trades on the internet is very much on the front line. So moving on, what are the main types of threats that you have? You have hacktivism. So you have hacking organisations don't agree with, politically motivated, and I think anonymous. I think if you looked on Twitter today, they're about to do a big dump of about 1.2 terabytes of information about Russian sensitive organisations. They are kind of politically motivated, dispersed, things along that line. We have organised crime groups. They tend to be well funded. Doesn't matter what country you're from. They come from Western countries, Eastern countries, Northern countries, Southern countries. And they can be highly organised and well funded. There has been evidences that they make serious kind of commercial gains there as well. I think the biggest one at the moment was the kind of Lapsus gang, which ended up being a kid in Oxford having a good old and trying to do a good old hack with a multi-factor authentication provider. But I think also on the far right is that nation states are using it as part of espionage. I think all states are doing it. Some are doing it a bit more illegally than others, but essentially, they are involved in the action. So the kind of scope of threat comes from the script kiddie in the bedroom, but it also comes from the kind of state-sponsored access, targeting kind of critical national infrastructure in there as well. So there's lots of different vectors of which it can come from. But essentially, what they're looking for is they're looking for weak points in the infrastructure, phishing emails, web links, points of entry. They tend not to hit straight away. They tend to do a bit of recon, elevate privileges, start knowing what's in there, and then making their move at the time. So, when you kind of look, this is an example of a scan in there. There's malware in PDFs, there's malware in Words. Obviously, there's been quite a lot of exercise and energy and effort in making sure that people can't send emails with macros in their Word documents, making sure that various technologies scan kind of attachments when they are sent. So there are lots of techniques, tactics, and procedures that have been brought from the kind of defensive side, or some might call the blue team side, to make sure that the deliverable of these things can be dealt with. So not allowing executables unless you've got the right authorization privileges, but still there's also bits of DLLs in there as well. So the kind of threat landscape that you have is it kind of starts off with the victim. So basically the threat actor will target the victim with, say, like a spear phishing email, and then they'll kind of deploy a Trojan, and then from that Trojan you can have a rat or a piece of malware in there that kind of usually kind of creates backdoors, and then from that you kind of get advertising in an exploit kits as well, and then that kind of propagates across the network as well and develop into ransomware. So essentially the first exploit doesn't tend to be very much kind of exploiting. The ransomware tends to be the dangerous payload. But I think also what we're seeing a lot of, and especially this was seen with the non-Petya variant that kind of went from the MEDOC server in Ukraine, even back in 2017, it's the threat of sleeper ransomware. Basically, the ransomware is not activated; it's within the background, and what it does, they deploy the payload so that once they hit your primary system, they also hit up your backup systems as well. And then usually they want ransom through Bitcoin and things along those lines. So the whole idea, they can be quite crafty. They threaten to do a data dump, or they threaten to kind of expose your sensitive information, and then essentially they'll try and get you to pay the Bitcoin. But otherwise, they can sometimes go out and destroy your data. So objectives for GRC is to obviously make sure that doesn't happen. So essentially here, what you've got here is making sure that you have good governance, and that's having a good strategy. So when you have strategy, tactics and operations, you've got to make sure that you have a good governance in place, policies, procedures and process. And then that kind of links to risk management in there. So making sure that you understand what your risk appetite is, your risk tolerance is. Then at the bottom, you've got your technology stack in there. Is it working? Is it coordinated? Do they hit the right layers? Have you got defense in depth as well? But also at the bottom right, you can certainly see things like compliant with external regulations in there as well. So one of the key factors that you need to make sure is that compliance doesn't equal security. Compliance is at the very most a baseline in there as well. But from that as well is making sure that your risk appetite meets your kind of governance capability, and then making sure that you have the ethically correct behavior in there as well. So essentially, the balance of kind of GRC is a balance between risk and maturity. The more risk that you have, the more mature your controls need to be. But essentially, is understanding what your tolerances are, using those framework controls you're going to put in place and things like that. But essentially, a good GRC is making sure that you have the right controls in place, that your maturity of your controls using the framework that you're going to use hits the right level. But most importantly, when you report upwards towards the board, is that you have the right appetite and tolerance within your risk processes. So essentially, you'll see this a lot of the time, and this is one of the things that we spend a lot of time doing when we do our initial analysis, is making sure that you kind of work up the maturity levels as well. If you're not dealing with personal data, if you're not dealing with payment data, if you're not dealing with restricted data or financial data, you may not need to go up the maturity levels as well. But one of the things, as Augustine will say, is that one of the things the ISO 27002 and the 27001 standard helps you to do is very much get from the managed and defined level. So that you have a management framework in place, you have an operational controls in place, and you have the ability to detect, react, and respond to any incidents that might happen. So how to approach it? Well, one way being ISO 27001 certified or 27002 certified. It's basically linking up the strategy, operations and tactics. And one of the really great things about the 27001 standard is very much kind of dealing with the strategy down to the operations, but also the 27002 standard from a controls framework deals with the operations level as well. And in there you can see lots of things in there, like making sure you've got good asset and supply management, given that probably 2/3 of all breaches happen through the supply chain. You have the legal and compliance things in place. You have a good layer of security operations, so security and event management, firewalls. You have good comms and ops, having good physical security in there as well, making sure you've got business continuity, making sure that you have a good joiners and movers levers process. That's always a really crucial one in terms of access control, making sure you've got defense in depth with vulnerability management. having good software development lifecycle, and then making sure that you have good assurance in the change management process. And then at the very bottom there, you kind of got the day-to-day controls that are really, really important to make sure that you have a robust and a resilient infrastructure in place. So the last slide I have is very much the kind of foundational controls, and hopefully when I press the button it will work. I pressed the wrong button. So this is all to kind of do the technical security maturity curve. So basically making sure that you have the firewalls and the IDS and the WAFs in place. And more you go up the maturity curve, the more kind of managed it's being. But obviously, to get to the very top requires a lot of money, requires a lot of energy and effort. But essentially, most people are around the managed area as well. And then also with the GRC maturity curve is basically once you've got your acceptable user agreements in place, your policies, you can then start getting more advanced with data classification, risk assessment, supply risk assessment, incident management plans in place, automation, and then doing much more along that level as well. And then also you have the incident response curve as well. Most, at the very least, have an incident response plan, have some run books, do some first responders training. But then as you get more mature, as you kind of do the red teaming and then kind of getting better at the in-house digital forensic readiness style of things as well. And then essentially what you kind of got here is a kind of GDPR level, and that's on a compliance, and that kind of sits in. So most people kind of around there and just gonna kind of get up to that level as well. But essentially your privacy strategy should be aligned to the security strategy, as you can't keep data private unless you keep it secure. So that's always an interesting one there as well. So that's all from me. Thank you all very much for your time. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. And now what I will do is I'll turn my camera off, switch to mic, and hand over to Augustine. Augustine, over to you.
Thank you very much, Nick. Good afternoon. I would like to present you an ISO 27701 information security management system as a governance, risk, and compliance strategy support tool to implement, to operate, and to provide accomplishment evidence for IT governance, risk, and compliance. So in this slide, and about IT governance, risk, and compliance management, we can identify two main problems. The business context, and as Nick has mentioned, ransomware, COVID-19, Ukraine war, all these changes and threats are changing fast and faster. So we need to incorporate a big number of changes to our organization, affecting to the security and privacy of our information assets. And secondly, there are a lot of requirements coming from compliance, legal, regulatory, and contractual requirements that need to be managed. So it's very difficult to keep and maintain a consistent governance, risk, and compliance management framework. And for this reason, we propose an ISO 27701 information security management system as the solution for these problems, as ISO 27701 Clause 4 provides a system governance structure for information asset management and protection for security and privacy, legal, regulatory, and contractual requirements accomplishment evidence, and information assets risk management evidence as well. All these changes and requirements can be mapped most of the times with ISO 27701 clauses related to the scope, to the policy, or to the risk management or controls. And those controls coming from legal, regulatory, and contractual requirements should be included in the statement of applicability of the information security management system directly, as they are mandatory for the business. Risk management as well is included in an information security management system to support governance, risk, and compliance strategy. Some elements of the risk management process, threats updates, and risk criteria could be also outputs of information security management system from the Clause 4 context analysis. Risk management process included in the information security management system should be defined usually as per ISO 31000 standard, and it includes risk assessment with risk identification, analysis, and evaluation, and risk treatment. As part of this risk management process, the organization is requested by ISO 27701 to perform a risk assessment with identification, analysis, and evaluation, to select appropriate information security risk treatment options, to determine all controls that are necessary to implement information security risk treatment options chosen. So a risk treatment plan should include controls from ISO 27001 Annex A and controls coming from the context requirement, for instance, related to geographical position, like earthquakes, for instance, interested parties requirements coming from shareholders or customers, legal regulatory requirements as GDPR, ISO 27701, SOC, or copyright laws, etc., etc. Cyber security from NIST, industrial security coming from EAC 62443 standard, business sector requirements coming from TISAX for automotive, IMO from shipping, or AA for lotteries as examples as well, or controls affecting to cloud security like ISO 27017 or CCI Star schemes. And finally, physical security standards as a PCI card producer. As well, controls related to human resources and general controls affecting to threats like fire should be included as well in the statement of applicability as a result of the identification of the controls. So after this, the organization is requested to compare these controls determined about with those included in the Annex A and verify that non-necessary controls have been omitted. And finally, to introduce a statement of applicability that contains the necessary controls. So all this process included in the risk treatment plan should be represented as well in the statement of applicability to provide evidence about governance, risk, and compliance, and update of them. And the Annex A, also known as ISO 27002, is the primary reference for this. So finally, an ISO 27001 certificate provides evidence of an information security management system properly implemented and operated, with proof of life for governance, risk, and compliance management, and the statement of applicability version included in the scope of the certificate could be considered as an IT corporate governance, risk, and compliance requirements accomplishment evidence together with the ISO 27001 certificate. And due to the need to adapt the information security management system governance, risk, and compliance support tool to the evolution and changes in the business environment of the organizations with regard to information security and privacy. Last February 2022, ISO 27002 has been updated to a new version, and this update is focused on governance, risk, and compliance management. As ISO 27002 standard is a control matrix, and it provides a guide for the implementation and operation of controls for high risk and security and privacy. ISO standard 27002 as well provides different recommendations for best practices in the implementation and operation of controls for information security, risk, and compliance. And ISO 27002 also becomes ISO 27001 Annex A, which serves as reference and validation point for determining controls to be applied in an ISO 27001 information security management system, as mentioned before. So the update of ISO 27002 also helps to update the evidence of compliance with governance, risk, and compliance requirements. A new approach in the ISO 27002 new version is made up of different themes or areas of operation, as organizational controls, people controls, physical controls, and technological controls, to include all areas of application of information security controls affecting to governance, risk, and compliance. So, in short, the main changes from previous 2013 version are that we have now 4 groups, including 34 controls for technology that we could match with cybersecurity, but the total number of controls is reduced to 93 controls from the 114 previous controls. We have a new controls numbering coming from A5 to A8. We have 11 brand new controls, some of them affecting to cloud services, affecting to ICT readiness for business continuity or monitoring activities as well. Most of the controls are updated or merged in a different one. And we have new topic-specific policies, in that case, 17 from the previous 11 policies included in the 2013 version. So, and very interesting new as well is that the new version of the standard also includes 5 attributes for each control to facilitate an efficient selection of controls and the configuration of the risk treatment plan. So all these things are coming in the new version of the ISO 27002. But the next question is how this review and update of ISO 27002 is going to affect to the company, to the organization, to the management system, and as well to the 27002 version of the standard. So once that this new version of ISO 27002 is published, the ISO 27001 will be reviewed, and accordingly, Annex A of ISO 27001 will be updated. As well, the ISO 27001 amendment is on the way and is expected to be published in August 2022. No major changes are expected about the common high-level structure, but most of the changes, if any, are going to be reflected, especially in the clause 6.1 related to risk treatment, but with the objective of clarification and not modifying any essential point. And finally, given the link between the risk treatment plan, the selection of controls, and the validation with the Annex A, we expect that all organizations to thoroughly review their treatment plans and demonstrate how the changes to the controls has been improved the effectiveness of the ISMS. The themes and the attributes in ISO 27002 will help different teams to support this review. So, as conclusion of this webinar in my part is that the ISO 27002, new version, is a refurbishing exercise of the previous standard. No major changes are expected, but a new iteration of the risk assessment and the risk treatment approach should be provided. An ISO 27001 Information Security Management System is the right tool to support IT governance, risk, and compliance management. The cybersecurity protection is an essential part of the ISO 27001 Information Security Management System and the statement of applicability. And finally, an ISO 27001 Information Security Management System certified by an accredited certification body as Lloyd's Registered Quality Assurance provides confidence and evidence of IT governance, risk, and compliance management. And that's all on my side. Thank you very much to all, and I hope this information will be useful for you.
Thank you so much, both Nick and Agustin. I really appreciate that. We've actually had multiple requests for the slides, which you should take as a compliment. So to our audience that are requesting the slides, once the webinar finishes and is no longer live, we can add that as an attachment in BrightTalk, so you can download a copy of the slides to take away. So thanks again to our speakers. What I'm going to do now is quickly reveal the first poll results. The question we asked is, what is your biggest GRC related concern? The top answer at 32% was cyber resilience, followed by legal and regulatory compliance at 22%, supply chain concerns at 21%, meeting risk appetite tolerance at 15%, and with only 7% incident management. So thank you so much to everybody for responding to that poll. I'm going to push out the second one now before we launch into our roundtable. So our second poll question today is, how confident are you in your organization's approach to cybersecurity? Always an interesting question to ask. 4 options. We have a robust, proactive approach to cybersecurity that I'm confident in. We have a reactive approach, and there are gaps that we need to address. I'm confident in our approach, but I'm concerned about changing geopolitical dynamics, or I don't feel confident that our systems are resilient or robust enough. So please do respond to that and be as honest as you can. We can't see who's answered what, at least I can't as moderator, so you can be free to be as honest as you like. Okay, at this stage, I'm going to invite Paul into the conversation. Hi, Paul.
Hello.
Thanks for your patience. I'm going to ask you to do us a favor, actually, Paul. I think what might be useful, and I'm assuming that the majority of our audience today does know about ISO 272 and 271, but there probably could be some newcomers to the industry who are looking for an overview or the top level stuff about the compliance that they need to know. So could you do us a favor and sort of go back to basics with it?
Certainly can. So, regardless of what the standard is, when you're building an information security management system, you need to build on a foundation and a structure. Without that structure, it's very, very hard to define what your processes and controls are, where they're applied, how you measure them, how you optimize them. So you need that basis and that structure. And the methods of doing this are very varied. ISO 27001 is an internationally recognized standard that can be certified independently through audit and assurance to determine the net worth of an organization's approach to information security management. And the certification standard for the ISMS is 27001, and that's the one that we have just been talking about. 27002 is an elaboration, so it actually starts to go into a bit more detail about how those controls might be applied. It goes into a considerably larger amount of detail, but you can't directly certify against 27002. You certify against 27001, and the bridge between the two is something called Annex A, which talks about what the requirements are in order for that ISMS to be certified by your accreditor. 27002 is an elaboration. So you would argue it's odd to see these things done round the wrong way. So seeing the detail being dealt with before the exam question has been set, it actually makes a lot of sense. What was interesting with the poll that we just had is 31% of our listeners are concerned about cyber resilience. The thing that strikes me about the way that 27002 has changed is we're starting to see a more broader depiction of what cybersecurity means. So if you looked at the original 27002, there was a considerably large number of categories, and that's been consolidated down now to 4 domains, which is people, physical, technology, and organization. Now, you need all 4 of those things to be working together to drive organizational resilience. And that's absolutely key. I mean, people saying we're concerned about resiliency rather than saying we're concerned about whether we've got the right level of antivirus and whether we've got the right joiner mover lever processes, kind of suggests that we're now starting to think more broadly about resilience for cybersecurity. That's a really, really basic view of it. So I'm sure Augustine and Nick have got views on this as well, but there are some really interesting things that have changed with the latest version of 27002, which we can talk about now.
What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna switch us over so we can see us all. Okay. Bring Augustine and Nick back into the conversation. Hello, welcome back. So let's start with that result from that poll question, actually. So the cyber resilience, as Paul just mentioned, coming in at 31%. Was that expected to you all, or did that surprise anyone?
Okay. What I can say as an auditor is that most of my clients normally they have implemented an ISO 27001 and ISO 22301 management systems together in an integrated approach. So normally most of for our customers related to the IT business, they are running an integrated management system covering not only information security with ISO 27701, as well business continuity, and business continuity including IT resilience as well in the pack. So the common high-level structure is facilitating this integration and this risk management, this integrated risk management for information security as well, business continuity and business ITC resilience as well.
Thank you. Did anyone want to add on to that, or do you want me to start going into the audience questions? Go on, Paul.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind adding on that slightly. So, circa 2022, we now live in an increasingly data and digital-driven world. And what that means now is, in the old days, technology used to support business. Where we find ourselves now is technology is driving business. So the need for resilience and the need for a strong information security management system has completely raised the stakes now. Resiliency is not just about being able to recover. It's about also being able to take a proactive stance. Now, one of the interesting new changes in the standard that I wanted to note was actually sort of a build on what Augustine said, is we're now talking about business continuity and ICT readiness. And I think that's important. If we've learned anything from the last 18 months, the speed in which we adopt technology, and in the case of the coronavirus pandemic, the way that we've adopted innovative technologies just to survive, means that you are now having to think about business impact of loss, changes in technology stack, changes in threat landscape, almost in real time. And what you tend to find with organizations that take a slightly dated view of business continuity management is they might do an annual DR test, or they might do an annual review of maximum tolerable outages. They might realign business impact assessments with disaster recovery and business continuance capabilities. That's no longer good enough. You need to know at breakneck speed, if you are hit by an extinction level attack, that you have the capacity to spot it quickly and recover swiftly to maintain business operations. So I think that is one of the critical changes in 27002, to start to introduce that notion that you need to be perpetually ready to handle crisis, to be resilient. And 31% of our audience agrees with that view.
I would like to say as well that I would like to say that not only ITC organization or companies related to ITC business are implementing ISO 27701 or any other management system. So we are discovering that this new threat that is incorporated with the Ukrainian war, that the attacks are affecting any kind of company. So the attacks are affecting as well to production companies as well. So most of the companies are running to integrate the operational technologies controls related to the industrial parts of the company, to the industrial infrastructure as well, linked to the ITC infrastructure as well. So in that part, the resilience is a little bit more complicated, and most of the times is linked as well to the business continuity. So the photo is becoming a little bit more complex because more control frameworks are being incorporated to the ISO 27001 statement of applicability and to the business continuity or business resilience as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you so much. I'm going to jump into audience questions now. I've got a huge list of my own questions, but I fear, as the audience questions are already piling in, that I'm probably not going to get through many of my own, but that's absolutely fine. So let's start with this one. I like this one. It's quite juicy. So the question is, do you believe that the bad actors also study the general maturity and assumptions of risk and governance guidelines, like ISO 27001 and 27002, to plan how they will attempt their attacks? A really interesting angle on this one. Nick, you're smiling. Let me come to you.
Yeah, I'll give a simple answer and then a defined explanation. The word is no. I think you know. Thing is, this is what I was talking about, the asymmetric nature of the cyber warfare in my presentation, is that, you know, the bad guys are looking at exploit points, they're looking at IP addresses, they're looking at domains, they're looking at web applications. They're not saying, oh, well, does this company have that control in place? Oh, well, let's test that control. That's the job of the pen tester. You know, that's what the white hat people are doing. The adverse actors, I don't think they think corporately. They don't think structurally. They think about, let's just do a whole load of metasploits, scan the network, and see where the resilience of the other side is. I think, you know, they don't use frameworks for attacks. They just kind of go on Discord or Twitter or whatever, and they share information on the deep dark web to attack. If I heard of any cyber criminal group using ISO 27001 as a framework in an advert, I'll get my hat and I'll start eating it. So there you go.
Does anyone disagree, or are we unanimous in that opinion?
No, even I will say that even the organizations don't read ISO 27001 and ISO 27002. So sometimes,
I just want to, and I'll make a bit of a quasi-controversial statement given what we're talking about here. I've actually spoken to Infosecurity Europe about this. I talk about something called the illusion of compliance. And my shepherd's warning to people out there who are being compelled to attain 27001 certification in the interests of placating their boards and their clients, I would say this: you're still going to get breached. You're going to get breached because you're not thinking about your company's culture. You're not thinking about the tone at the top, and you're not thinking about shifting security left into your business strategies. You cannot protect your organization by just attaining 27001 certification. There, I've said it.
That was very menacing, Paul, the way you leaned into the camera as well. I felt like you were talking directly to me.
You know, but in all seriousness, the number of case studies I've heard of organizations that said, we've got the NIST CSF, we're lined up to that, we do maturity assessments, we're ISO certified, we make our people do security training, but we got breached last week and we lost 80 terabytes of data. You did that because you have not got the foundations for building good security. Now, this is where GRC helps. GRC helps you take the frameworks of information security management systems, contextualize them to your business, and drive risk-based conversations with your board about how these threats can challenge your organization's strategic objectives. If you're not doing any of that, you are basically just cranking the wheels of prescriptive processes that will not drive your security agenda forward. And to Nick's point, threat actors can pretty much, I could stake a $5 on it, or they're phishing. They're using social engineering. They're using basic, well-known exploits, be they 0-day or be they something much more rigorous because you're not patching your systems. They're not looking at the risk, the risk maturity of an organization. They're not looking at how they could exploit nuances in how ISO 27K1 is applied in an organization. Using good old-fashioned methods of just hitting an organization where it hurts, which is that weak inherent culture and that disconnection of security maturity to the board's objectives and outcomes. Sorry, soapbox, but I do feel strongly about that. ISO is the cake; it's not the solution.
I would like to say that never ever we can say that a management system can provide 100% of security in any way. But a management system can provide discipline and the opportunity to identify the problems and to solve the problems later. I mean, always you are going to find a smarter boy than you, and you never can be sure that. But I would like to point out that the process in the management system is initially to identify all the necessary controls, not to go to the Annex A or to 27002 and to look for the controls. The organization is requested to identify any kind of control, general, in different frameworks. Well, I have mentioned PCI car producer. PCI car producer extended control frameworks is related for credit cards producers, but they have incorporated a very, very well physical security controls framework. So I know many organizations that are not related to the credit cards, but they are using these extended control frameworks to incorporate to the controls that they are applying. So the organization is requested to look for any kind of control. And as Paul have said, okay, we will discover problems, we will implement new solutions, and we will try always to resolve the problems that with discipline we are going to establish. Otherwise, if we have not a consistent structure as a management system, our possibilities to survive are going to be decreased in a very important way. Sorry, because I'm speaking in English. I would like to do this in Spanish, but I know it's not possible. In Spanish will be more easy for me. Sorry about it.
Your English is better than our Spanish, so you don't worry about that.
It's probably better than my English. You're doing an excellent job.
I don't speak Spanish, so I'm not going to try. So.
No, you're doing a brilliant job. Please don't worry about it. Another question that's come in, a very practical question, which should hopefully be quite a quick one to answer. Do you have any indication on whether it will be the standard 3 years to transition to the new standard, or the extended 5-year transition period for COVID? Will that be likely? Paul, do you know the answer? You look like you do.
I'm going to defer to my esteemed colleague Augustine. I think he's got a more definitive answer. I have a view, but not the definitive answer.
In my knowledge, the discussion is between the 2 normal years and 3 years of transition. Okay. But I have not listened anything about 5 years transition.
2 to 3 years. Okay.
What I was aware of as well. Yeah.
To be honest, I would ask Augustine that question myself, but you know.
And the accreditors will generally, so when you're in transition and NXA is in transition, they will, especially if you're in mid-cycle, they will generally allow returns of both. So they will probably run a parallel with 2013 and 2022, and then you'll have the cut-off point. And that probably leads on to another question which we might want to tackle, which is, when do I start thinking about 22 versus 2013? I think that largely is driven by where you're at in the cycle right now, I guess, although there's always a good time to think about where the framework is going. James, I don't know whether you've got a view on that.
That's right. I agree.
Okay, perfect. So I think that leads on to another question come in about the timing of it and when security teams need to start thinking about planning for these updates or actually making some of these updates happen. Is it now? Is that the answer? Is it yesterday?
Well, I think the answer is now. So one of my and before I say this, I'm completely appreciate why it is, but we waited 8 years for an uplift to this. At the ISF, we have something called the Standard of Good Practice for Information Security, which we keep up to date every 2 years. We're about to do our 2022 release. And what's very interesting, I got the analyst to check this, in the new controls cited in the 2022 version, 27002, were included in the 2020 Standard of Good Practice. So that shows you the latency. I guess a quasi-facetious answer to that would be, especially if you look at the new controls in 27002, talking about things like cloud, talking about things like threat intelligence, thinking about business continuity and ICT readiness, and data privacy by design being a kind of an encapsulating covers 2 or 3 of the new controls. You really should be thinking about it already.
Yeah, I would say when it went from 2005 to 2013, they took a big chunk out of the business continuity elements of it, which I think was a bit of a step back. And it's good that they've actually put it back in for the 2022 version. You know, I think that's a really important part of the resilience. I think, you know, I think the 2013 version did dip down a bit on the resilience, and it's good to see they brought that back in.
Okay, thank you. Next question, which threat list do you suggest to be used in or for risk analysis? Nick.
Yeah, I think that I kind of had a look at that question. I thought that's a really interesting question. I think if you have a list of threats to fill up your risk register, you're instantly challenging the threat picture. And I think really the best way to look at it is look at the big breaches that have happened, you know, saying it's happened to them, could it happen to me? Look at things like WannaCry, NotPetya, you know, there are loads of good case studies, like the one in December 18 when that airline, I'm not going to do vendor names, that everyone knows what, you know, the airline kind of got done, you know, but the best way to look at what I would consider the threat list is kind of go through the case studies of where it's happened before. Because if it's happened to someone else, the chance of you happening it to you is probably higher. And kind of look at your risk and controls and the frameworks that you have in place to deal with that. You know, the thing about a lot of cyber attacks is, you know, it's quite rare to have a completely new, fresh one in the wild, and everyone's going, "Oh my god, how on earth did that happen?" You know, it's not like kind of COVID, for example, which was like something. Well, how do we deal with it? We don't know. A lot of cyber attacks, they have signatures from previous ones. So I think if you have a really good look at all the previous case studies, understand what the threat vectors are, you're going to go a long way, or you're just going to be really unlucky.
As an auditor, what I would like to say is that the list of threats should be defined, customized for each company. And one of the problems that in the past we have found during an assessment related to the risk management process is that a company get a list of threats and they perform 1 year the risk assessment over the list. Next year, do the same with the same list. Next year, do the same with the same list. So this risk management process is not realistic, it's not valid, it's not good. So one of the tasks that a company and organization should perform related to the information security management system should be to define and to update as necessary the list of threats to be considered during the risk assessment management process.
And it's important to have a business context on that. And without teaching the metaphorical granny to suck eggs, it starts with who are we, why are we, what are we, and it then is where are we, what are we trying to do as an organisation? What's going to stop us getting there? What are the local and what are the societal and what are the external influences, i.e. the threats that could impede us? And you need that context. I would also encourage people to do a little bit of outlooking. Now, look, we've all come through, I was going to swear then, but let's say a pretty torrid time where, you know, one day to the next, we really didn't know what was going on. But start trying to look beyond sort of 12 to 18 months. It's absolutely important to understand what today's threat landscape looks like. But you also need to start to blend that a little bit with what the threat landscape tomorrow looks like. So, for example, we release a piece of research every year called Threat Horizon. I'm sure other organisations do something similar. Take that material as well and blend that into your analyses and assessment. But, you know, to Augustine's point, it has to have business context. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a list that's just completely unbearable.
Okay, thank you. So let's review the result of the second poll question, which is how confident are you in your organization's approach to cybersecurity? Now, unsurprisingly, what I would call the yes buts answers have been the most popular. So at 37%, our audience said we have a reactive approach, but there are gaps that we need to address. 28% feel confident, completely confident. 27% are confident but are concerned about changing geopolitical dynamics, and only 6% of our audience don't have any confidence at all. So yeah, if you add up the 37 and the 27% of the yes buts, that is the majority of our audience, which I would say is quite unsurprising. I'm going to push out the final poll now because we still have so many questions to try and get through. Of the following, which is your organisation likely to prioritise in the next 12 months? ISO 27001, ISO 27001 certification, cloud services certification, cyber essentials or cyber essentials plus, or NIST CSF gap analysis. We had some questions in about NIST actually. Okay, back to the questions. Once 27001 is updated and mirrors the changes in 27002, is this likely to impact or reduce the auditing time for the certification process? No.
No way.
Augustine's answering this one.
No way. No.
Should we just leave it there? That's a simple question with a simple answer, right? No.
I was just going to run through Google Translate to see if we lost anything in the English-Spanish, but it's definitely no.
No.
Okay, right. Let's put that one as answered. The NIST question that I referenced a second ago, is risk management process concerning NIST cybersecurity framework aligned with the ISO 27001 requirements? Augustine, do you know that one?
Normally, in the past it was, and I understand, but you can understand that I am an ISO lead assessor. So for me, the Bible is the ISO standard. So normally I will put in the opposite. I will expect that NIST controls should be aligned with the controls included in the Annex A or in the ISO 27002. That used to be the common reference for all the extended control frameworks.
What's interesting, what they've done, actually, I quite like this. And we haven't really been around time to talk about this, but the attributes that they've started to put into place into the 2022. Yeah. Now, what they've done there is they've applied a pivot, and you know, whether they did this accidentally on purpose, but the cybersecurity concept attribute category breaks down into identify, protect, detect, respond, recover, which is the overarching framework of the NIST cybersecurity framework. So they've made an attempt to try and bring them together. And I don't think that was accidental.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think it's quite an interesting question, because in the risk management process, you've either got NIST 830 or you've got the ISO 27005 standard, and then you've got the NIST cybersecurity framework, and then you've got the ISO 27001 kind of. To me, the NIST CSS is much more of a life cycle, whereas the ISO 27001 is much more of a kind of management standard as well. So I understand there's a bit of mapping in place, but I think you know, when I do my consulting pieces, is that the you know, doing an ISMS is different from doing an NIST CSF. NIST CSF is much more of an operational, reactive, proactive framework, where the ISO 2701 or ISMS, whatever you want to call it, it's much more about the management of how those processes are done. Because once you've done the ISMS, you then have audit, risk management, oversight, leadership, and management, where the NIST CSF is much more at the kind of operational level and the life cycle. So I think it's almost trying to put square pegs in round holes, but they're kind of trimmed.
It's fair, but I have to admit, when I've had conversations with boards in organisations that are at the start of their journey, I wouldn't dare of going in there and trying to talk about 27001, 27002. But what I do like about the NIST CSF is that's quite a good framework. And you know, I do remember one meeting in particular where our chief executive came back and said it's all about identify, protect, detect. Even if they start to understand the terminology and the structure, that is a massive step forward in engagement, and then you can kind of level up. So there is some correlation, and I agree there are subtle differences there. But I think having that, and you know, I want to go back to Augustine's work, which has really stuck with me. Just having the discipline and the structure in these conversations is just a massive step forward, no matter where you start. Just being able to structure those conversations and structure that engagement, and then start to layer on, that's the way that you drive it forward. And then GRC doesn't become an annoyance or an irritation or something that you have to do. It drives effective, constructive, progressive, proactive conversations with your business.
Yeah, it's a really good point. We've got lots of questions about timing, specifically about timing. Can you confirm when 271 will be updated and when they will be adopted as British standards? How long do you get as a grace period for implementation? I think we said 2 to 3 years on that latter part of the question. But when do these updates actually come into effect? Did you say August in your presentation, Augustine?
Yes, that's the estimation that we have been provided by the accreditation body.
Okay, so August.
And it's an estimation, all right?
Okay. So okay. To be confirmed, TBC. Okay, I'm very aware of the time, so I'm going to reveal the results of our last poll question, and then I'm going to ask one final question to the panel. I'm sorry, we've still got so many unanswered questions. We've got a very active and engaged audience today, which is excellent. Of the following, which is your organisation likely to prioritise in the next 12 months? And 35% winning the vote is ISO 27001 certification and or training, followed by 22% on the NIST CSF gap analysis, 14% to both ISO 27001 certification and cyber essentials, and only 13% with cloud services certification. So quite a mixed bag there. So the final question I'd like to ask you all, because We are all about actionable learning at Infosecurity, and we like people to come away from these webinars feeling like they have really solid advice and are able to sort of move forward in their day jobs. So I'd like to ask each of the panelists if they could just give one piece of advice to a CISO or an information security team ahead of these updates on what that focus should be, or a main concern, what would it be? Nick, let's start with you, please.
One thing, I think always be ready for an incident. You know, just, I mean, not kind of keep yourself up at night a bit, but if it goes kind of wrong or it goes pop, know what your immediate actions are, know what your immediate pain points are. You know, there is so many incidents that I've seen where no matter how much GRC you do, no matter how much preparation you do, when it requires quick immediate action, they don't know what they're not that quick reactive action. Then it all goes horribly wrong. All that GRC day-to-day BAU stuff goes out the window in an incident. Then you know you'd failed.
Okay, thank you, Paul.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm just going back to the previous poll where we had quite a high number of people said that they were confident that they, in their organisation's approach to cybersecurity, 37% had a bit of a yes, but. I don't know if you saw yesterday, but the Department of Culture, Media and Sport released the Cybersecurity Breaches Survey 2022. And what was striking, one of the things that I pulled out of that, is that data showed that 2 in 5 businesses use a managed IT provider, but only 13% review the security risk posed by their immediate suppliers. My advice to the attendees is this: you're only as strong as your weakest link. When you think about the context and scope of your compliance frameworks, please start looking at your suppliers. Please start looking at how far that has sprawled, and please take that extended threat and risk to your organisation very, very seriously indeed. And I'm surprised that that's not been more prominent in the lines of questioning. It kind of sits awkwardly in what we've been talking about, but it's an important blind spot that you need to be thinking about.
Great advice, thank you. And last but not least, Augustine.
I will agree with Paul, because organizations are really concerned when they are protecting the information, but once that they share this information with a third party, you lose the control over this information. But my own advice is please be realistic and don't trick yourself. I mean, if you can reach this level, go for this level and implement as necessary, but don't make tricks. I mean,
brilliant advice. All 3 of those pieces of advice are excellent, actually, and hopefully will stay with our audience. They will stay with me. So at this point, all I've got time to say is thank you. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to Nick, Paul and Augustine. Thank you to LRQA, of course. And I'm sorry we didn't get through all of the questions today. We will make the slides available, so you can check back in a couple of minutes, and we will have made those available as a download. So thank you so much to our audience as well for all of your engagement, for responding to the polls and for asking loads of great questions. We hope you've enjoyed it. And yeah, this webinar is now ending. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.